In February of 1978, two sheriff's detectives arrived at a house in Los Angeles County because of something extremely strange. There was a car buried in the yard. Not an abandoned car sitting behind the house, not pieces of a car. An entire automobile was underneath the ground. As dirt was pulled away, the roof appeared. Then the windshield. Then the unmistakable shape of something that absolutely did not belong underground. It was a Ferrari. More specifically, a dark metallic green 1974 Dino 246 GTS. And someone hadn't simply dumped it into a hole. They had tried to protect it. There were rugs around it, plastic, material placed around parts of the car as though whoever put it underground expected it to come back out someday. And that detail changes everything, because investigators quickly discovered that this Ferrari had disappeared years earlier under circumstances that seemed perfectly ordinary. It had supposedly been stolen. There was a police report. There was an owner who said he'd been the victim. There was even an insurance payout. For years, that appeared to be the entire story. But it wasn't, because once investigators figured out why this Ferrari was really underground, the story of the stolen Dino turned completely upside down. And there's one detail about the people who buried it that makes the entire plan almost unbelievable. We'll come back to that. But first, we need to go back 4 years, to the night the Ferrari disappeared. October 1974. Rosendo Cruz was a plumber living in Alhambra, California, and he bought his wife an extraordinary present, a Ferrari Dino 246 GTS. Technically, Ferrari marketed the Dino under its own Dino mark rather than putting Ferrari badges on it. But nobody looking at this machine could mistake where it came from. The Dino was low, curved, and beautiful, powered by a mid-mounted V6 and designed in an era when Italian sports cars looked almost impossibly exotic beside ordinary American traffic. Cruz's car was dark metallic green. It had optional Campagnolo wheels and Daytona-style seats, and his wife barely had time to enjoy it. She reportedly drove it only about 500 miles, because less than 2 months after Cruz bought the car, it vanished. December 7th, 1974. Cruz and his wife went out to celebrate their wedding anniversary at the Brown Derby on Wilshire Boulevard. According to the story, Cruz later gave police something bothered him when they arrived. The valet seemed a little too interested in the Ferrari, so Cruz decided not to leave it with him. Instead, he parked the Dino himself some distance away. Then he and his wife went inside for dinner. When they came back, the Ferrari was gone. Think about how believable this must have sounded. A conspicuous Italian sports car, Los Angeles, parked away from its owner, gone while the couple ate dinner. Cruz called the police. A stolen car report was filed. The Ferrari disappeared into the enormous machinery of Los Angeles auto theft, and eventually the insurance company paid the claim. That should have been the end of the story. Except somebody knew something the police didn't. The Ferrari wasn't gone. It was waiting, underground, and someone hadn't simply dumped it into a hole. They had tried to protect it. There were rugs around it, plastic, material placed around parts of the car as though whoever put it underground expected it to come back out someday. And that detail changes everything, because investigators quickly discovered that this Ferrari had disappeared years earlier under circumstances that seemed perfectly ordinary. It had supposedly been stolen. There was a police report. There was an owner who said he'd been the victim. There was even an insurance payout. For years, that appeared to be the entire story. But it wasn't, because once investigators figured out why this Ferrari was really underground, the story of the stolen Dino turned completely upside down. And there's one detail about the people who buried it that makes the entire plan almost unbelievable. We'll come back to that, but first we need to go back 4 years, to the night the Ferrari disappeared. For more than 3 years, nothing happened. No Ferrari, no arrest, no miraculous recovery. The Dino simply became another stolen automobile that was probably assumed to have been stripped, destroyed, exported, or turned into parts. Then, in early 1978, something happened at a house on West 119th Street, and even this part of the story would become confused over the years. The famous version says children were playing outside and digging in the mud when they encountered something hard beneath the ground, something metallic, something that felt suspiciously like the roof of a car. Contemporary Los Angeles Times reporting described children alerting sheriff's detectives Joe Sabas and Dennis Carroll, but years later, Carroll would describe another element behind the discovery: information from an informant. Either way, investigators now had a very strange reason to start digging. And what they found wasn't a body, it wasn't a gun, it wasn't stolen cash. It was far stranger. As a skip loader and men with shovels removed the dirt, the shape underneath slowly emerged. A roof, glass, bodywork, and finally, a Ferrari Dino 246 GTS. Imagine standing there in 1978. You're digging up an ordinary residential yard in Los Angeles County, and a Ferrari is coming out of the earth. But then, investigators noticed something even stranger. Whoever buried this car apparently didn't want to destroy it. They wanted to preserve it, and that created a new question. Why? The Dino had been covered with materials intended to protect it. Rugs, plastic, tarps. There were even attempts to keep debris and insects away from parts of the car. It wasn't exactly professional preservation. In fact, whoever did it made some serious mistakes. The windows weren't completely closed. Moisture had gotten inside. There was corrosion and deterioration, but the intention seemed clear. Someone had gone through considerable effort to put an entire Ferrari underground without completely ruining it. That's a very peculiar way to dispose of stolen property. If thieves wanted the Ferrari gone, there were much easier ways. Strip it, chop it, burn it, dump it. But burying a complete Ferrari takes planning. You need a large hole. You need equipment. You need somewhere you believe nobody will notice. And if you're wrapping the car before putting dirt over it, you probably care what happens to it, which means whoever buried this Dino may have expected to see it again. Remember that, because it becomes extremely important later. Investigators checked the Ferrari's identity, and that's when this bizarre object emerging from the dirt suddenly connected to a 3-year-old police report. The Dino was Rosendo Cruz's car, the Ferrari stolen after the anniversary dinner, the supposedly suspicious valet. The car parked on Wilshire, the insurance claim. Everything matched. At first, this seemed to solve the mystery. Thieves stole the Ferrari. For some unknown reason, they buried it. Case closed. Except that explanation had a serious problem. It didn't explain why the thieves had tried to protect the car, and the deeper investigators looked, the stranger the original theft began to seem. The excavation turned into a media sensation. The Los Angeles Times photographed the Dino being pulled from the earth. Suddenly, this wasn't merely recovered stolen property. It was the buried Ferrari. People wanted it. Farmers Insurance had paid the theft claim, so the recovered Dino belonged to the insurer. And after the publicity, potential buyers began calling. A lot of them. Farmers decided to capitalize on the attention. The company displayed the car and solicited bids. And then this Ferrari, which had already supposedly been stolen once, was victimized again. While it was being displayed, people reportedly stripped pieces from it. Even small components disappeared. The car that had survived years underground was now losing parts while sitting above ground. But eventually, a businessman named Brad Howard acquired the Dino. And what happened next is remarkable, because despite everything this car had endured, it came back. The Dino was restored. It returned to the road. Eventually, it would wear perhaps the most appropriate vanity plate ever attached to a Ferrari. Dug up. But there's still a problem with this story. We haven't answered the most important question. Why was it underground? And this is where the story changes completely. Because according to the investigator who worked the case, the Ferrari wasn't buried because a random car thief needed somewhere to hide it. The people involved had a completely different reason for making the Dino disappear. And it began before the car was supposedly stolen. Go back to December 7th, 1974. The anniversary dinner, the suspicious valet, Cruz deciding to park the Ferrari himself, the couple returning to discover it missing. It's a good story. Maybe too good, because retired Los Angeles County Sheriff's Detective Dennis Carroll later described what investigators came to believe had really happened. According to Carroll's account, this wasn't an ordinary car theft. Cruz had allegedly arranged for the Ferrari to disappear. The theft was part of an insurance scheme, and suddenly, several strange details began making sense. The Ferrari hadn't simply vanished at random. People had allegedly been hired to take it. The plan was for the car to disappear permanently. The Dino could be chopped up. The parts could be sold. The remains could be disposed of. Cruz could collect the insurance money. Everyone involved could get paid. Simple. Except the men who took the Ferrari encountered a problem. They had possession of one of the most beautiful cars in the world. And apparently, they couldn't bring themselves to destroy it, so they improvised. And what they did next created the photograph that would make this Ferrari famous decades later. They buried it. But even that isn't the strangest part. Because remember the plastic. Remember the rugs. Remember the attempt to protect the car? They weren't necessarily burying the Dino forever. They appear to have been hiding it. which raises an obvious question. If you're going to hide a Ferrari underground so you can recover it later, what is the single most important thing you need to remember? Where you buried it. And according to the story that emerged, they didn't. That's the absurd final twist. The Ferrari wasn't buried because the thieves wanted to destroy it. It was buried because they apparently wanted to save it. The original plan called for the Dino to disappear. Instead, the men who took it allegedly decided the car was too desirable to destroy, so they concealed it underground with the apparent intention of recovering it later. And then, they lost track of where they'd buried it. A Ferrari had effectively been hidden so well that the people who hid it couldn't retrieve it. For more than 3 years, the Dino sat underground. Meanwhile, above it, people lived their lives. Residents came and went. Children played nearby. Cars drove down the street. And beneath the soil was an Italian sports car connected to an alleged insurance scheme whose participants apparently couldn't find their own hiding place. The Ferrari had not been buried by someone trying to erase it. It had been buried by someone trying to keep it. And that mistake may be the reason the car survives today, because if the original plan had actually been followed, there might be no Dino to restore, no famous photographs, no dug-up license plate, no bizarre story. The Ferrari survived because the people who were supposed to make it disappear couldn't bring themselves to destroy it, and then couldn't find it. There's something almost perfect about what happened afterward. The Dino survived the alleged insurance scheme. It survived being stolen. It survived years underground. It survived moisture, dirt, and corrosion. It survived being excavated with heavy equipment. It survived being stripped of parts after becoming famous. And eventually, it became a functioning Ferrari again. Brad Howard had the car restored, and decades after the excavation, the once buried Dino was still being driven and displayed. Think about the chain of decisions required for that to happen. Someone allegedly decides to make a Ferrari disappear for insurance money. The men hired to dispose of it decide it's too beautiful to destroy. They bury it instead. They apparently lose track of it. Years pass. The car is discovered. The truth slowly emerges. Someone buys what looks like a ruined Ferrari and brings it back to life. Today, photographs of that excavation look almost unreal. Men standing around a massive hole, a Ferrari emerging from the earth, dirt covering bodywork designed in Italy to be admired on some of the most glamorous roads in the world. But it's real, and perhaps the strangest part is this. The hole that was supposed to make this Ferrari disappear forever is exactly what made it unforgettable. If you like unbelievable, true stories about extraordinary cars, subscribe to the Rapid Vehicles YouTube channel, because there are a lot more stories like this hiding behind some of the world's most famous machines. And if you're as interested in the cars themselves as the stories behind them, visit rapidvehicles.com for automotive stories, collectibles, diecast models, and more. Sometimes the most interesting thing about a car isn't how fast it went. It's what happened to it when somebody tried to make it disappear.